Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 16, The Land of the Sorbs. What are you doing with that atrocious head? Mongard asked Osney, who had tied the head of a derv he had hacked off to his mount. Souvenir, he said. Why do you think you need a souvenir of the head of a derv? Asked Amonza. It's not like it's your first. Oh, but it is my first on this mission. Snarly branches wrapped around the thick of the forest. They had been riding for 5 days and were glad to finally be drawing near their destination. They rode down a crooked dirt road. Tangles of ivy and weeds wove their way up the timbers. In the middle of nowhere, they dismounted in front of a strange-looking sight. A large ship stuck in the middle of a forest. What in the world is this? Cosney stared at the oddity of a ship built on the ground. It's a ship, Mongard answered. No, it's not a ship, Navi said, correcting them. It's his house that looks like a ship. You've got to be kidding me, Osney looked up at the big boat. Why does he live in a ship when there's not a speck of water in sight? Oh, he's always wanted to live near the ocean, Gamonza explained, seeming to understand the man. Been drawn to the great blue since he was a child and got his first peek at it. So why doesn't he move there? Coffey inquired. Because his family is here, Gamonza explained. He says that one day he's going to move. He's talked about it forever, but he has yet to follow through. Cosby looked the ship over. Nice streamlines. He knows what he's doing. I think it's cool, Navi, Klein said, climbing the steps and rasping on the door. Just as he was about to knock a second time, a voice boomed from above them. What brings you spinebacks here? Asked a man standing on the deck of his ship house. 2 horns protruded from his man's head, characteristic of a Sorb. Judging by outward appearance, Buldar didn't look like a very bright individual, but he was, in fact, an erudite having a sheer love for learning. He had the heart of a teacher, eager to share the wealth of knowledge he had acquired. Around his head he wore a cloth to keep his curly, out-of-control hair out of his eyes. He didn't know it, but when he pushed his hair straight back, it made his nose look even bigger. But his horns took center stage. We're just looking for you, Navi smiled, fidgeting at the nautical rope that graced the door frame. Well, open the door and come on up. Already tried, confessed Navi. It's locked. Walking down to the lower portion of the ship, the Sorb opened the door, but to his surprise, something came flying into his face. Instinctively, he caught it to keep from being pelted in the face, but when he stared into the bulging eyeballs of the decapitated head of a derv, he let out a shrill with enough volume to wake the dead. Reacting to the situation, he threw the head to Navi, who screamed and threw it back at the Sorb, who in turn screamed and threw it into the forest. Real funny, Osney, said Buldar. Where'd that come from? Well, I just hacked it off a few days ago, Osney explained. Dervs in these neck of the woods? Buldar sounded concerned. Is that why you look so rough? He asked, noticing Navi's rag-tad bandage. Yep, Navi broke in with some practical things. We have much to tell you, he began. But first, can I get some sterile water and clean bandages for these nasty wounds? As he spoke, he unwrapped the blood-soaked bandages from around his thigh and his ankle. Mongard never said a word about his ripped arm and mangled leg that had bled through the rags he had tied around them. Inside the house was as cozy as any other home. The place was tidy and garnished with tasteful nautical decor. An oil lamp and a couple of large seashells sat on a handcrafted wooden table carved with a map of far-off places like a seaman might use. Sikel, he said, calling his daughter, bring some hot water, ointment, and bandages, and help Navi dress his wounds. Navi raised his eyebrow with pleasure and grinned. The Sorb didn't miss the gesture. No, you may not court my daughter. He shook his finger at Navi. So don't even think about it. I didn't say a word, said Navi. But why is it that no one wants me to court their daughter? Because we don't want our grandsons to wear green and purple braids in their hair, he said. Navi mouthed the words along with him. Even so, that didn't stop Navi from flirting with her whenever the man wasn't looking, shooting an occasional wink here or there. Navi liked being doctored on by a beautiful woman, her soft hands, the sympathy of her green eyes, her pleasant smell. But Navi knew she wasn't his type, too young, too ordinary, and too quiet. He wanted one as quirky and original as himself. It was then that Buldar noticed the new fellow, Mongard, and the blood-soaked bandage around his bicep and leg. He couldn't help but notice the man's head twitching and jerking and wondering what was wrong with him and why they had brought this handicapped guy along. When Buldar offered him a fresh bandage, he asked for fresh water and a needle and thread instead. While everyone chatted, he stitched up himself without blinking an eye. Buldar was certain the man had a screw or two loose. While Buldar was distracted, Navi slyly reached into his satchel. He had lugged in and slipped the hand of a derv that he had cut off back at the river behind Buldar, resting it on his shoulder. At first, Buldar felt a slight touch and swatted at it. But when he felt the hand move to his neck and the claws begin to close in, Buldar let out a deafening scream and leapt off of his chair like a madman as he raked the decapitated hand and slung it across the room. Since Navi and Osney were the culprits behind this cruel joke, they were the first to double over with laughter. Before long, the entire ship house was in stitches, except Buldar, who confessed that he nearly wet his pants. After the practical jokes and a bit more horsing around, the conversation turned serious. As they sipped on hot, spiced balsamic tea, Gamanza explained the purpose of their visit. Rubbing his scruffy face, Buldar sat and listened to them as they told of the finding of the Sword of Power.